Today, we're going to take a look at our dogs' tails and consider the many complex ways that our dogs might use their tails to communicate. There are a few specific elements we look for when we're reading a dog's tail. One of those is height, another one is the type of movement that we're seeing, and the speed of movement as well. In this picture, we see what we would call a neutral tail. It's resting out from the dog's hips at a natural height. It's not taking a lot of effort for the dog to lift or lower that tail, and we're not necessarily seeing a whole lot of movement either. A dog with a neutral tail is likely to be more relaxed. When we look at this dog, we see a lowered tail. This is going to be a sign that the dog may be more concerned or feeling a little bit more inhibited or appeasing. The tail is, in this case, still tipped upward at the end, but what we're really looking at is the base of the tail where it does connect to the hips. And we see that it's actually drawn downward from the hips. Here we have a tail that is tucked. A tucked tail is actually pulled inward towards the dog's rear end. And this is another sign that our dog is going to be actually more afraid in this case. It's not uncommon to see a dog with a tucked tail that's still wagging. You might see a very tight, fast, back and forth little wag when the dog's tail is tucked. This is still a sign that the dog is very, very scared, and that tail movement is often meant to appease whoever they're interacting with. Here we can see a tucked tail at another angle there. You can see that it actually follows the curve of the dog's hips as they're pulling it in towards their body. When a dog is afraid, this is one way they can protect themselves against a potential threat. When a dog has a docked tail, it can be a little bit more difficult to see exactly what's going on. But even in this case here, where we have a very scared dog, you can see that with that docked tail, it's still pulled inward towards the dog's hips. And we can actually look at the set of the dog's hips and see that they're slightly lowered. When we're looking at high tails, we have to take a couple of things into consideration, and environmental factors are going to be one of those. For example, here we have what we would consider a flagging tail. This is a tail that's sticking straight up and curved over the dog's back. It's also a very stiff tail. In this case, Fredo heard one of his least favorite things on the planet, the neighbors slamming their back door when they were about to do laundry, and he was very, very upset to hear that. So his flagging tail is a way of threatening them away from that laundry area. You can see also when he's wagging that flagging tail that it's lashing back and forth, almost hitting either side of his hips, and that we're getting no hip movement there when he's wagging. There's none of that happy wiggly butt that we might see when a dog is wagging a happy tail. That is a very angry tail wag. Another type of high tail that we might see is in play, or when our dogs are aroused. In this case, we have a dog who's playing with a jolly ball, and we have that high tail. This is an indicator that the dog is simply excited about play. You can notice the difference between this high tail and the flagging tail in an uncomfortable dog. Here, the tail is still sticking out from behind the body rather than arching over his back. Even in this case, we have another high tail, but we still not consider this flagging. This dog's tail naturally curls upward a little bit, but when we look at the base of the tail where it connects to the hips, it's still pointing out from the body rather than upward. If this dog's tail were flagging, we actually might expect the tip of the tail to touch the dog's back. We can take a look at a couple more playful tails here. When we're thinking about movement in each case, we can see that when a dog is playful, we get broad sweeping motions back and forth, and the tail is at a neutral height. So in Fredo's case, we have the high tail, both back and forth movement, showing that he was upset. Here, we have a tail at neutral height, maybe a little bit high because of that arousal, but also sweeping back and forth. When we're looking at this tail, if we were to see it in motion, we would probably also see more loose body movement from the dog. Here again with two playful dogs, we see those slightly high tails because they're excited about play, but still not arched over their backs, and we get that loose movement that's meant to indicate playfulness, and that's meant to reduce any chance of conflict between the dogs. It's always important to consider what your dog's natural tail posture is. For example, when we have a dog like this, whose tail curls tightly over the back at all times, we might have to determine other factors to help us understand what we're seeing. As you find yourself assessing tails, remember to look for the height of the tail, as well as the kind of movement you might be seeing and the speed of that movement. And also remember that a wagging tail does not necessarily indicate that a dog is happy. We need to recognize that wagging tails indicate how aroused a dog might be, and that the emotional state could be positive or negative in either case.